It is my pleasure to introduce our first moderator, and you will see that we've got 3 people as opposed to 4 at the table, and the reason for that, Tom Dials, one of the panelists, was sick. However, he has dialed in, and he's going to be making his presentation over the phone. But it is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Becky Johnson, who her bio doesn't actually say it because this is in the process of, she's the incoming dean for the Marine Corps War College. And she has got a little Big 12 blood in her. She's a University of Texas, Austin undergraduate, and we love the Longhorns around here. And she did her graduate work, both her master's and her PhD at Georgetown. She's taught at American University, South Carolina, also at Georgetown. And you can see the other things about her current research and some of the work she did in Bosnia, which is in her bio. But there's 2 anecdotes, if I can just be brief about it. One of them has to do with one of her majors at the Command and Staff College. It was stationed in Djibouti and having some challenges, I guess, with his team in Djibouti, ethical challenges. And, you know, of all the things that they could do and the assets they could reach out, they reached out to Dr. Johnson to bring her out over Christmas to Djibouti and to provide some ethical training and education, leadership development for that team. And then the other anecdote, and so that's kind of on the maybe low end as far as the number of people. On the high end, the UK Defence Forces, they brought all of their lieutenant colonels and colonel command teams together for ethical training. And when they made the decision to reach out to the Marine Corps could have selected any number of people, but they brought in the leading ethicists within the Marine Corps, and that was Dr. Becky Johnson. So we're very, very honored to have you here, ma'am.
Well, I'm certainly delighted to be here, although once I heard a couple of boos from y'all for the Longhorns, a little less love. I'm not the biggest baseball fan in the world, so I don't have good baseball stats and history like General Milstead, but I am certainly excited that come this Saturday, the Longhorns are going to stomp K-State. I would think at least you all would be supportive of this. But Becky Johnson, I'm with Marine Corps University. I'm so excited to be here. That trip to Djibouti that Colonel Denning just mentioned was a lot of fun. And people make a big deal about the fact that I went to Djibouti over Christmas. But what I did on Christmas Day, it was Christmas of 2010, is I went swimming with whale sharks, got as close, you're not supposed to, I didn't, like they actually sneak up on the side of this room, right? As close from here to you, from whale, and then on New Year's Day, we went to a cheetah preserve. So it was a lovely experience in addition to what I absolutely love, which is an opportunity to speak with Marines and service members about ethical leadership and how do you build ethical, strong command teams. I'm certainly excited that we've got an hour that is devoted to this topic of trust in leading, because in my experience working with Marines in particular, this question of trust is critical. I think Colonel Bashir's is absolutely right, the way that the Army has got trust in the middle of those concentric circles of character, competence, and commitment. Because talking to our students, and I work with enlisted Marines, officers, from junior Marines up to very senior leaders, they will tell you, of all the topics we discuss, how do you develop ethical leaders? How do you set and maintain an ethical command climate or an ethos in your organization that is ethical? How do you identify different types of moral and ethical decisions? Is something temptation? Is it a dilemma? Is it a moral softball? Of all the sorts of issues that we discuss, trust is this undercurrent that runs through all of them. And I have learned to make the point to ask Marines when I talk to them about ethical leadership, what happens when trust is violated? Is it possible to regain trust once it's lost? And universally, Marines tell me no. That once it's gone, it's gone. That Marines are still going to do their job. They will still behave professionally. They're not going to disobey a lawful order. But once a leader has lost their trust, it is not repaired. Not that it couldn't be, but it it does not happen to repair a violated or a fractured trust relationship. So I think it's great that we have the opportunity to listen to three very thoughtful and experienced leaders on this issue of trust and leading. We are going to start with Dr. Bob Ajelli, who is going to talk to us about research-derived foundation of the followers' trust that focuses on the critical characteristics of leaders and what leaders must embody in order to elicit that type of trust from followers. And maybe, Mr. Dials, if you could mute your speaker. But to tell you a little bit about Dr. Ajelli and what we're about to learn from him in the next 15 minutes, he's the director of the Multicultural Business Scholars here at KU School of Business, and he teaches courses in organizational behavior, human resources management, and a skills-based management at both the undergraduate and graduate levels, and so has the ability, I think, to speak to us if we want to continue this theme of leader development from some beginning learning of leaders in a professional situation to more senior. His PhD is in clinical psychology with an emphasis on industrial mental health. I would be excited to learn more about what that means.
Me too.
He was the project manager and lead instructor for the KU School of Business's multi-year initiative providing management training to Westar Energy. And he recently led an employee survey and organizational development effort for the Kansas Highway Patrol that the agency credits for having led to significant improvement in culture and organizational climate. Dr. Ajelli is a former Human Relations Commissioner for the city of Lawrence, Kansas, and is the director of the Rosa Blanca Project, which is a cultural exchange program between the U.S. and Cuba. Following, we will have Mr. Tom Dials, who will be joining us by phone. Mr. Dials is a distinguished military graduate in the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. He was commissioned second lieutenant in the Armored Division in regular Army in 1970 and spent 25 years in service as an infantry officer in Vietnam and also 2 tours in Europe in command and operational staff assignments, both with armor and cavalry. Upon his retirement from the military in 1994, Mr. Dials accepted a position as the Director of Market Research and Analysis with Armed Forces Insurance Exchange in Fort Leavenworth. He assumed the duties of President of the Exchange and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Armed Forces Insurance Corporation in January of 2003 and retired from that organization in December of 2011. And then, of course, we have the best named individual who is on the panel, yay, at the conference today, Colonel Jay Johnson, who will be speaking to us. West Virginia native, grew up in southeastern Ohio, enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserves back in the 80s, where he served as a combat engineer. He then became an officer, served in combat in both Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, also as the commander of the Marine Wing Support Squadron 271, where he provided detachments in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, including deploying his squadron to Iraq in support of the 2nd Marine Air Wing Forward. Colonel Johnson has attended the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, where he earned a master's degree. And since July of last year, he's been assigned as the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Detachment in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I think we've got a great panel today, a great breadth of experience, both on the academic, business, and military side, and I expect a great exchange. But what I will do, though, is turn it over to Dr. Ajelli. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, and indeed it is a pleasure to be here. Was a little concerned that when you were talking about the whale sharks that you did point at me, and I want to let you know that my teeth are not that sharp. We wanted to talk a little bit about this whole concept of an academic approach, the research approach to leadership. And interestingly enough, I think that what we're going to see is that many of the same concepts that you all have identified here, right, so on this first slide, in terms of trust, are variables that have come up over and over again in research. So we'll start off here with a basic definition. Whenever we're talking about a concept of trust, it's perception. It's a belief that is based on certain characteristics of the leader: ability, integrity, dependability, fairness. Now, if you think about it, in many respects, this concept of commitment that you all talked about, because certainly the ability and the integrity piece were part of your model, but dependability, fairness are very I think, in many respects, similar to this whole concept of commitment, walking the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about another perspective because you know how it is with academics. If you ask 5 academics to give you a definition, they're probably going to give you at least 5, maybe 10 definitions. So we're going to take a look at another person that certainly has gained an awful lot of prestige and fame in terms of his work with leadership, Stephen Covey. And what he talked about the fact is that trust is born of 2 basic dimensions. The first is competence, and competence is all about your capabilities. It's about having the skills to do the things that need to be done, making sure things happen, the kind of in-depth knowledge that allows a follower to feel a sense of trust and confidence in your capacity to lead. And it also has quite a bit to do with making sure that you are creating the kinds of resource availability that the follower needs in order to move forward. And the second, character. To what degree does a leader demonstrate genuine care and concern? Do people walk away from that leader feeling as though this person really cares about me? This person is making an effort to think about my future, my reality in the organization, or are they, again, just kind of talking the talk? Communication skills, absolutely critical. And I know that this was touched on a little bit earlier. There's a variety of different ways of getting to the same place in terms of communication. But communication needs to not only communicate content, but communicate character, a sense of genuine caring about the individual that you're working with. And that's all about speaking honestly, consistency, being dependable, and transparency. And again, this was based on a book that was written by Dr. Covey that's called How to Best Leaders Build Trust. Thought we would, again, you know how academics are. We all want to take a look at the research and make sure that we've covered these things. This is a rather interesting name, Trust and Leadership, Meta-Analytic Findings, Implications for Research and Practice, blah, blah, blah. What are we talking about in meta-analysis? Well, in essence, what we're doing is some kind of quantitative statistical analysis. We take a look at a variety of different experiments, a variety of different studies that have all touched, in essence, on the same issues, on the same variables. And we look for the extent to which these variables overlap across studies. Now, in this particular study, and the reason that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with you about it, these folks took a look at over 4 decades of studies that all had to do with trust and leadership. So by condensing all this down into the critical elements, I think that we were able to find fundamentally what the research at least is saying about trust. And in this particular area, what we're talking about is a character-based approach to trust. There's 2 approaches to trust that have been identified in the literature: relationship-based trust and character-based trust. Relationship-based trust really has a lot to do with the kind of relationship that one develops between the leader and the followers. And character-based trust, which is the one that I'm going to focus on a little bit more, has to do with the kinds of qualities that the leader manifests that engender a sense of trust, that generate trust, and tend to maintain a sense of trust. Now, what emerged from that research were 4 different concepts: interactional justice, procedural justice, participative decision-making, and distributive justice. Participative decision-making, I think, is one that we all have a pretty good concept of, but let's go through what some of these other concepts mean. Interactional justice. At its heart, interactional justice has to do with the extent to which the leader is able to communicate a fundamental sense of dignity and respect in the follower. How does one do that? And in many cases, it seems like it should be kind of a one-size-fits-all, but We've got so many leaders in this room, and you realize that oftentimes you have to take a variety of different approaches. The same approach does not work with every person, and frankly, the same approach does not always work with the same person. But in one way or another, being cognizant of the fact that people fundamentally want to be respected, and fundamentally they want to maintain a sense of dignity. Procedural justice. Again, this concept of fairness. And we're going to see that this is an element that emerges on a very frequent basis. Fairness, equity. And in this case, how are decisions being made? Are you handling this in an equitable, fair manner? Trying to take into account all the various constituencies. You can't always make a decision that is going to satisfy everybody. But to the extent to which you're making a decision that is transparent enough that you're able to demonstrate to others that, in fact, you've made a reasonable decision. A reasonable decision in the sense of being fair to others. Participative decision-making. Again, a big chunk of trust comes from the extent to which you are engaging in the followers in the process of decision-making. Now, clearly, not every decision merits input from every follower. But to the extent to which you can bring people in the decision-making process, you tend to increase the whole concept of trust. And finally, this idea of distributive justice. Resource allocation. Is this being done in a fair fashion? Now, let's be realistic. We're human beings. We tend to have preferences for certain kinds of people. And the literature would suggest that we tend to like people that are, guess what? Similar to us. And it's called the similar to me effect. To the extent to which we find that people share the same values, perhaps the same interests, perhaps our same sense of humor. There are a variety of different elements that go into that, okay? And there's even a theory of leadership out there that's called LMX, Leader-Member Exchange Theory. It says that, fundamentally, leaders tend to have an inner circle and an outer circle. And those people that are in the inner circle, guess what? They get access to the better stuff. They get better assignments. They have access to better resources. They're more likely to get promotions, etc. We need to kind of work against the concept of leader-member exchange and realize that every member in your group, in your team, is critical for the success of the overall team. So the extent to which you can treat people around the entire group in a fair fashion, the more likely you are to engender trust. Okay, well, getting back to this meta-analytic study, they took a look at the extent to which these particular concepts were correlated with high sense of trust, generating high levels of trust between the leader and followers. And at the very top of that is interactional justice, and that should not come as much of a surprise. If we do not feel we're being treated with a sense of dignity, we do not feel we're being treated in a respectful manner, our chances of trusting the leader are likely to go down and pretty substantially. And as you pointed out, I have 5 minutes.
One thing I've wondered about.
Academics really have no concept of time, as you can imagine. So I will try to move this along, ladies and gentlemen. Procedural justice. Treating people in a fair way. Participative decision-making. Make sure that you get them involved. Distributive justice. Make sure that you use fairness in your approach to allocating of resources. Now, interestingly enough, 3 of these critical elements here have to do with equity theory. Okay? And equity theory is all about a perceived sense of fairness. I'm not going to go through this in an elaborate fashion, but just to kind of give you an example. Okay? If I ask you to take a letter to the post office, I'm going to give you $50, are you going to be motivated? It doesn't have a bomb in it. There's not a trick question. Okay. All right, but now I'm going to offer you $100 to do the same task. Are you going to be motivated? Feel motivated? Not as much. And that's fundamentally what equity is all about, okay? That we do not perceive equity or fairness in a vacuum. We perceive it in relation to what others are getting. Again, it's this whole idea of inputs and outputs. And people will tend to adjust their outputs, how much they're giving you, on the basis of not only how much they're giving. Was that my 5-minute warning?
It's something.
But I was hoping not. All right. Let me kind of move ahead here. One of the things that seems to be so critical, and the reason that equity emerges over and over and over again, okay, is the fact that equity is not just a psychological phenomenon, but it seems to be fundamentally wired into us, okay? It's wired into our brain system. If you don't believe it, wait in line at the post office, or wait in line to get a ticket to get entrance into a baseball game and see somebody cut in line. What happens? It's not like, excuse me, sir. It's usually people get really ticked off, all right? So this phenomena is not just exclusive to human beings. This is a phenomena that appears to be wired into a variety of species. Do we know if we have volume here?
Great question.
Because that's a great idea.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Okay.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness.
I think there's a couple of critical pieces here, besides the fact that this is rather amusing. What happened here? It wasn't just that this monkey perceived, inequity and was upset by it. Well, what did the monkey do? Threw the cucumber at the people. When people perceive inequity, when people perceive that they're not being treated fairly, it not only drives motivation down, but frankly, it drives up a desire to get even. Okay? So I will leave you with that particular thought, and we will move on then.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Mr. Dials, can you hear us? Mr. Dials, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great, sir. We are ready for you.
Super. Well, it's great to be with you, even if as a disembodied voice, but I suppose that's somewhat appropriate in Kansas, so pay no attention to the men behind the curtain, even though they're responsible for me being able to be with you. It was a yeoman effort on their part, and I appreciate the technical assistance that they provided. So I suppose what I'd like to do is just kind of share with you an individual perspective on leadership and trust that's more experiential and a learning-based approach. I certainly cannot claim the title of scholar, nor have events proven me to be either a wildly successful real estate mogul entrepreneur or foundation executive. But I have had measured success in both the military and later in civilian business pursuits. I attribute those outcomes to two complementary traits. First, that I'm a fairly astute observer, and second, a master of improvisation, even, or perhaps especially, when all seems lost, which incidentally is a highly sought-after characteristic among we insurance weenies. It is human nature to seek the laurel of leadership, but what does that mean? When we are young, it gives us authority. We move up in the social hierarchy of our group and assume positions of relative power over our fellows. Emerging leaders are often first about authority and thus tend to be more directive in their dealings with the group. Not a trust-building strategy, I would submit. Long ago, an old military mentor shared with me the adage that a curse attends the forced performance of a duty. And over the course of my military career and later in civilian industry, I came to appreciate this adage and its general application to almost any leadership issue. What I propose to review with you briefly today is that trust is perhaps the key enabler of leadership, and that without trust, any leader will be hard-pressed to create a high-performing organization. How many of you can recall your first stressful leadership environment, either military or civilian? Was it an overwhelming situation? Mine certainly was. How can they expect me to do this? It's not fair. I have some of the skills, but not to the expected performance levels. And most importantly, I don't know any of these people. How can they expect me to lead people I've never even seen before? That's a tough row to hoe. My experience has been that young and particularly inexperienced leaders tend to enter the arena on a continuum which stretches from dogmatic on one side to inspirational on the other. There aren't many archetypes in the real world, thus most leaders can be placed along this distribution based on myriad interpersonal and organizational dynamics, some of which you just heard discussed. But generally, older and more experienced leaders will tend to drift more readily towards inspirational, and younger, less experienced, or as we old fogies who are forced to transition to a real world where profit and loss and cash flows rule, not operational effectiveness, tend to gravitate more to the more familiar and comfortable ground of positional authority, at least initially. What the new or young leader faces as a task is how to transition the existing organization from what he or she may perceive as a stovepipe, heel-to-toe structure to an empowered relationship environment where emerging young leaders are encouraged to have skin in the game, to accept risk and responsibility, and to push to achieve organizational objectives, even if at some lower level. Mistakes are to be underwritten by more senior leaders and used as teaching points with the young leaders sent back out to implement course corrections. These experiences can be great leadership laboratories out of which will emerge young leaders of dash and innovation who inspire their subordinates. Also, these exercises will mark brilliant and yes, some not so brilliant young minds who simply do not have the vision and intellectual clarity to be an effective leader in unstructured situations. And that, by the way, is a useful outcome too. Lastly, I'd ask that you remember that there are always multiple leaders, even in small organizations. And just because one happens to occupy the titular catbird seat does not make he or she anything more than the formal and perhaps not even the most important leader. Constantly seek out informal leaders in your organizations. Encourage them, reward them, challenge them, especially if they don't see eye to eye with your goals, for they are the seed corn of your unit or company a decade out, and they are far too precious a resource to be wasted. Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. That's the end of what remarks I'd like to make at this time.
Thank you so much, sir. We hope that you can stay with us for the question and answer period at the end.
I will attempt to do so.
Great, thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Johnson.
All right, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Colonel JJ, and only thing that's standing between you and that good Kansas City barbecue that General Mills talked about is me and then my counterpart Rebecca walking us through here. It's an honor to be here. Let me get by the mic here. It's an honor to be here. Thank both foundations for inviting me, and also KU Business School Business. So thank you very much to be here. Of course, it's always a little bit extra pressure when you have your former commanding general here, Boomer Milstead, when I was the battalion commander. So, sir, don't grade my homework too harshly just today. But we do have a little bit of doctrine in the Marine Corps, and this one is I kind of focused a little bit on we're going to talk about trust, but it just got rewritten or updated, if you will, last summer, and it's entitled Leading Marines. And that's what I'm going to kind of step through a little bit, and those are the kind of the topics that we're going to hit briefly, and then hopefully I'll kind of spur some thoughts and some comments from you. I'm going to throw out some teasers to kind of maybe get some engagement as we kind of walk through this piece a little bit. So that's kind of what we're going to do. But as Rebecca mentioned, I am the senior Marine at the Marine Corps Detachment. So if you kind of look at it from a leadership perspective, I'm on the platform teaching our future agile, adaptive, innovative leaders to go out there and be these great XOs and operations officers. But on the other paradigm, on the shift, I'm also the senior Marine that handles all the prisoners for the Marine Corps at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks as well. So two spectrums of leadership, no doubt. So before we do that, though, I got to get the juices flowing a little bit. You know, it's part of that, concrete experience, adult education. So you got to get moving. So I've got a quick little video. Hopefully it'll come up. right, good. Hey, if I was in the classroom, then we kind of talk about, hey, what'd you see here and all this, and so on and so forth, and we walk through that piece. But the reason why I kind of show that is because, if you will, all across, the United States somewhere, there's a recruiter out there, and he's looking basically for that young person, male or female, to become a United States Marine, and the transformation process will begin there. And just like it did for me back in almost 32 years ago, this coming up fall, Staff Sergeant Harvard showed up in my family, and then he had to build that trust right there from the very get-go. Many of you have served in recruiting duty, kind of understand that piece. So sometimes you got to sell mom and dad on what's going on, more so on mama's side, that you're taking her youngest son and you're going to put him in the Marine Corps. So that was a pretty big deal, that first initial, but that's what it's all about in the Marine Corps, is establishing that trust from the very get-go. We establish that piece. And then for the next 12 weeks or so, the most important person in our lives is that drill instructor, regardless if it's at Parris Island or if it's at San Diego or for our officer candidates in the hills of Quantico, Virginia. Even today, my guest of honor coming up for the ball is a Iwo Jima veteran. He's 88 years old. Actually, he just turned 88. And he remembers his drill instructor, hot mic, like it was yesterday. So from that piece, once you graduate and you've earned, they've pressed that EGA, that Eagle, Globe, and Anchor in the palm of your hands, that you've earned that trust to become a United States Marine. And I think that sets the foundation for what builds on. They even take on any MOS, or military occupational skill, mine as a combat engineer or whatever, regardless of whatever, if you're an aviator, I know we have plenty of men here, and also on our legal side, you'll basically become a basic rifleman or a basic rifle platoon commander before you even go out and earn your, take on your occupational skill as a United States Marine. And I think that's important because it establishes that baseline fundamentally across the Marine Corps. You can reach out across anywhere and know that you have the basic fundamentals of being a warrior and understand those combat conditions, and you can provide support as required and have to step up. And there's numerous examples of during OIF and OEF where that happened. These same things that we inspire to as we go through school ties in also with I know we have our Navy brethren, our naval character and our expeditionary mindset, which from warriors from the sea to that force that is most ready when our nation is least ready to be called out. And that gets into the trust, if you will, of the American people that the United States Marines will accomplish that mission if we're called upon to do so. The final piece of that little bit of thread of ethos gets at our traditions. And it kind of talks about our customs and courtesies. It means something to be called a leatherneck, devil dog, and our Marine Corps motto of Semper Fidelis, always faithful. And in the next couple of weeks, all across the planet, Marines are going to be joining together to reflect on what it's meant to them this past year to be a United States Marine. For these past 240 years, we'll celebrate and honor those who have gone before us as well as they belt out at the position of attention our Marines hymn. Those traditions build that foundation that I'm going into now, foundations of leadership, which instills what are called our core values. And that gets at honor, the courage, and commitment piece that they make and that they earn once they've joined up with their units and start becoming a United States Marine. So how do we get to that piece about being a good Marine and a trusted leader, if you will? Well, we could talk about character, and then we learn and we understand the lead. We go through our schools of professional military education, just like the one I'm at right now. And then we go through those experiences and those lessons learned, hopefully not lessons observed, if you will, of becoming a good leader and trusted. So I know we talked about, General Mills talked about those traits and those principles that guide us, if you will, and those core values, if you will, is our kind of code that we know. And we kind of talked about you don't want to break that trust. If you lose that trust, if you will, as a Marine, it is hard as a Marine leader. You're probably never, ever going to get that piece back. You probably won't. To kind of highlight that kind of example, last year we had a guest speaker come, and Ted Thomas is here, our Director of Leadership. You'll get to see him in a little bit, but he brings out a pretty good team of guest speakers that come through. And before I say who the guy was, the scenario that he's running to, he's trying to come up with basically a name for the book that he has just created talking about leadership. And he sat down with one of our Marine Corps generals who I got to serve with in Quantico as one of his commanders, was Lieutenant General George Flynn. He just recently retired. And when this guy sat down with General Flynn and asked him, what's so special about the Marine Corps, about what makes you so dynamic in your leadership and and so forth, he said one little phrase: officers eat last. And Simon's like, whoa, Simon Sinek. He's a guy, and from there, he took that and he wrote a best-selling book called Leaders Eat Last. Everywhere across the planet, you can walk in any chow hall or dining facility, and without an unspoken word, it'll all just kind of form up. The junior Marine or junior servicemen and women will get in line, get their tray, and proceed through the chow hall, and those more senior will eat last. That, to me, epitomizes what we're talking about, our foundation of leadership. That selflessness, putting others before ourselves, is a key piece to that. There's obviously numerous challenges that comes with entrusted and being what we like to call, and everybody kind of talks about, a leader of Marines, okay? Regardless if you're a second lieutenant all the way to the rank of commanding general, it means something to be called a leader of Marines and to be trusted to do that. But some of those challenges that you kind of run out and you see out there, and it kind of talks about in the warfighting publication about friction, and that comes from, there's moral and then there's physical piece that goes with that, those types of things. So if you see a guy, you've been out drinking, and you make a decision, hey, you got your buddies out there, and you know he's had too much to drink, who's going to make the decision to drive? You're going to let him get behind that? You're going to let your buddy get behind that wheel, okay? No. Or the physical, or one of the physical challenges. You're out, especially as the engineers, we're always fighting up against the IEDs, taking on some of those challenges as well. Those things are constant. And there's things you have to think about all the time and trust, if you will, and empower those leaders that are around you that they'll make the right decisions. You kind of do that because you can't be every place, everywhere. You can't do it. There's a lot of talks about, we talked about, what do you talk about? Poor command climate. That gets at the morale. And somebody mentioned about toxic leadership. Those things are out there. They're at all levels. You've got to get at them. You have to attack them, because they will poison your wherever you're at, be it from an academic perspective in your schoolhouses, and also from your business, and no doubt in your military and your commands. They will absolutely poison them. That can be overcome with with good communication, that empowerment I was talking about, that trust, and then the accountability piece. If somebody steps over the line, yes, you have to hold them accountable. Okay, those things have to happen. The last thing I'll kind of share with you is and I got one last little video to close up with to kind of talk a little bit about, is I use this, one of my guys in my ops team kind of came up with a little phrase when I had command in Quantico about getting my hands around this beast. It was the largest battalion in the Marine Corps. And what we talked about was the art, basically, of being part of this unit, this organization. And that art of being a successful part of a successful command climate. And that was, A, accountability. They're accountable for their actions, be it in uniform or out. readiness, okay? Are they ready? Have they taken personally responsible for their own physical fitness, mental, physical, moral health, to be prepared to go if they're called up to do so? And then lastly, the T piece was the training. Was it realistic? Did they get at that piece? Did he just gaff it off, just go through the numbers? Did they train to time and not to standard? Those kind of little cliches that you hear all across. So we kind of used that phrase to get at some of those difficult things when you're looking at an organization in Quantico to get everybody rowing in the same direction. So I'll leave those with you, but I know in the fourth, I think the fourth panel we talked about is you're going to get into complex type environments. So this next little video I'm going to show you that it's very imperative even today that we need agile, adaptive, and innovative leaders to get at what you're going to see here on this video. So.
If we don't adapt to change and to the environment that we're in, that we are not doing our duty to help defend this country.
Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
So we've got a little over 10 minutes for Q&A before we're going to break for lunch. They let us run a little bit longer. What questions do you all have?
Scott Bowles, I'm the Chief of Staff of the Kansas National Guard. Maybe it's a small point on that, on your video, Doctor, that I noticed. If you believe trust is inherited, that it's there to give, or is it something you have to earn? Because the thing that I noticed on that monkey video was that the monkey tested the rock, which was telling me that he trusted the situation and wanted to check himself first. I would like your comment about that from a human level.
I think it's both. I think that it needs to be earned in the sense that you need to manifest qualities that allow you to generate a sense of confidence from followers, okay? He was checking it. I think one of the reasons why he was checking it was, why is this guy getting a grape and I'm getting a cucumber? Maybe there's something wrong with my rock. But indeed, I think it's a bit of both. You'd like to think that you go into a situation that people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt most of the time. There was one other tiny little piece that I was going to cover that we didn't have time to do, and that is that we know we've got a very good assessment of personality. It shows that there are certain people that are more prone to be trusting and other people that are more prone to be skeptical. And so, again, it's that whole, one size does not fit all.
Others? Yep.
you talked in your opening comments, you talked about how hard it is, or if not impossible, to regain trust. And we've had two anecdotes. One of them being with either a crane that somebody broke because they did the wrong thing, or going down the wrong route, which ended up in being lost to life. And yet, it does appear that at least in those situations, and certainly in the latter of the two, going down the wrong route, that the leader was giving the opportunity to try to regain that trust. And I'm just curious if you could maybe pull that thread a little bit.
Yeah, and it surprised me the first few times that our students, our Marines, would tell me that once trust is lost, you don't get it back, because that seems severe, and particularly because Marines know that people make mistakes, and so forgiveness and messing up is part of learning. They also don't like it when they're not allowed to make mistakes, because then they don't grow and they don't develop. But what I understood our students to be saying, and again, this is any number, pick a Marine of any rank, over years, consistently they say this to me. I think there's a difference between a mistake and a violation.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them, a mistake, poor judgment, even if it's, I'm hot and I'm tired and I should have taken a different route, but I didn't. It's poor judgment, but it's not a violation of integrity. So for our Marines, when they're talking about a loss of trust, it tends to correlate with the violation of integrity. So maybe to come back to where the Army thinks about it with competence, commitment, and character, maybe for more junior Marines, they could excuse a lack of competence. There's very little tolerance once you reach a certain rank, at least in the Marine Corps, for a lack of competence. But if you're more junior, you're still figuring things out and people tend to be more forgiving about it. But if it's a violation of commitment, if somebody is lazy, they don't care about the other folks that they're working with, or if it's a violation of character, if it really is a lie, cheat, steal sort of a scenario, if character is weak, you don't train your way out of that. There's certainly things you can do to strengthen character, but by the time you become a field grade officer, if you're an individual of poor character, training and education ain't gonna help you. You are who you are, right? So I think the reason they are so forceful in their language isn't because of the honest mistakes. Junior Marines lacking in competence because they're junior, there's an expectation they're gonna make mistakes and dork stuff up. It's the idea of the commitment or the character piece, an integrity issue, which seems, at least when I talk with my students, it seems to be fairly unforgivable, but that's a hard one. Yes, sir.
So am I correct in saying that, people say sometimes you earn trust, but I think trust is there. You start with trust. You start with a pocket full of trust and it's yours to lose, right? When the young soldier, young sailor, young airman checks into a unit, he trusts his leader. And then it degrades from there. You either maintain it or it degrades. So, I think it's a kind of a misnomer to say we earn trust, because you're just saying we can't re-earn it. So I would offer that we have trust. Kid checks in, young officer, young enlisted, he trusts you. Now it's yours to lose. Is that fair? Doctor?
Sir, I agree with you on that 100%. I mean, just in, we definitely don't want to be living in a zero defects, if you will, command type environment, which will kind of, not inspire innovation and those kind of adaptive leaders that we want out there. We want to allow them to go out and make some of those mistakes and teach and learn, and hopefully they'll learn from those mistakes. You just, the old adage is, you don't want to make the same mistake twice while you're out there. But when you're in command, let's face it, if there's a commander out there and that commander has lost, what the term is lost confidence, or that special trust and confidence in your abilities to lead that unit or whatever, that comes with the price of being a leader. That's just it. You strap that on. I signed up for that. I wanted that. I want that challenge to lead Marines. I want that. All the risks that come with that does not matter. The chance that Boomer Milstead gave me a chance to lead a battalion, not only here, but also in combat, was special. and to lead those Marines.
John Campbell, Stuttered Moving Group. Isn't there that, based on your anecdotal story, isn't there a little bit of earning trust? And maybe it's from the junior person to the senior person, but certainly the general didn't give you that battalion to lead because he didn't know you, and he had experience with you, and he had confidence in you. Sort of making lieutenant colonel or colonel, whichever organization it was that you were leading, provides some of that, but isn't there also a bit of demonstrating? I know, second lieutenants have to demonstrate to the NCOs before many of those NCOs will rely just emphatically upon them. So I think there is a two-way street.
Yeah, you're getting at what's called a growth process. I mean, you're not going to laterally move a lieutenant or a captain to be a battalion commander, whatever. So he'll have to work up. So he has to shown that he's proven through his merits and then his ability to continue to get promoted, move up through the ranks, and then lead at certain different levels, be it from company command, to battalion command, regimental command, so on and so forth. That selection process that they go before a very competitive selection board to be commanders at the 05 lieutenant colonel commander level, and then at the colonel captain level is a very competitive, I would say, across all the services to have that opportunity. But yeah, you got to kind of earn your stripes as you're kind of working up through there. Some of it gets at those tactical, technical procedures as you learn your skills, how well you perform. I mean, as an engineer, those things cross the gamut. And then you find out all of a sudden, like we're going out there, we're working with, let's say, just for example, when I was in Cuba, we worked with land mines. Well, we had minefield maintenance down there. They're all gone now, but there was a procedures that we used to track those and to record those, and so on and so forth. Well, okay, now flash forward into my career, that nasty little critter called an IED. Okay, so how are we going to get at that piece? And our explosive ordnance disposal guys, our EOD guys, and our engineers, when we had something go down like that, they were kind of like our first responders, if you will, when we first kicked off with OIF of getting at those devices. And then we kind of, if you will, we started learning how to get at that. But that came with a cost, and that was through blood to get at some of those things. So yeah, those were some challenges that we had to face out there and learn those.
Well, I might add a quick point. I think fundamentally there's a difference between military organizations and private sector organizations. I mean, there's no question that in a military organization, you're socialized. You have to count on each other. You count more on the vetting system. In private sector, you might find yourself working for somebody that is in that position because they're the owner's son or the owner's cousin or a friend of a friend. And I think in that kind of situation, you're probably going to deal with a higher level of skepticism where trust has to be earned a bit more.
There was someone in the back, ma'am. Did you have a question? Yes, ma'am.
You just said what I was going to say. I had a completely different experience as a field grade officer in the Army versus being a business leader in the private sector. And the Army trust was there and is yours to lose. And in the private sector, I mean, you have to earn every bit of that trust.
Yeah.
The skeptics around you. So.
Colonel?
John Meach, I'd like to talk in particular to any member of the panel. Maybe you could talk about the importance of relational trust, because sir, I would say to your comment that there is trust to lose, but I think there's also trust to be earned. And I think in the military, in particular, in the Army, by virtue of who I am and what I wear on my uniform, everyone else at least that is in the Army and has served in the Army look at this uniform today, and there is an element of credibility established instantly based on the badges and stuff that are on my uniform, I think. And so there is that, but I would say yes, and could you maybe comment on this notion of relational trust, because I think that's one that in military young people think really well.
I think it's absolutely critical. again, the idea of trust being a static phenomenon, it just is not a static phenomenon. I mean, human relations are these constant exchanges. And if the exchanges support a notion of trust, then I think you will maintain that trust. But if over time the exchanges are not consistent with trusting behavior because you're not being dependable, because you're not being respectful, because you're not treating people in a fair fashion, I think that will begin to degrade the sense of trust, whether it's in the private sector or it's in the military.
We've got time for one last question. Or we have barbecue.
When do we eat?
Perfect decision. You all have been fantastic. Thank you to the panelists. What a great, insightful day. I hope we have a good lunchtime conversation and a good set of panels after some.
And thank you, Tom Dials, for dialing in. And please go ahead and take your gift. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. I'll do that.